So, environmentalism isn't really a political theory on its own necessarily, but it's something that a lot of other political theories are um, tied up with or influenced by in various kinds of ways. So basically, environmentalism takes the natural world to be as valuable as, or not, at least as valuable as humans. And the other political theories we've been looking at have really focused on humans a lot and our good in the world and what political theory is measured as being good based on its effect on humans for the most part. So environmentalism takes that and turns it around and says, well, wait a minute, the natural world is also important, at least as important as humans. And some environmentalists even take human nature itself as being essentially destructive and something that we need to keep in check, in kind of the same way that Hobbes thought that human nature was destructive to other humans. So other political theories implicitly assume ethical intrinsicism for humans. So this is the idea that humans have innate value independent of their use for other humans. So remember Kant's idea that we should be used as a means, never be used as a means only, but people should be treated as ends in themselves. So some varieties of environmentalism have this idea about all species and nature as a whole and not just humans. So that's kind of a different take than what we've been seeing so far. And there are a lot of examples of different environmental theories, but one is this deep ecology movement, which is, at its core, again, it has the belief in the intrinsic value of every living thing in nature. And Arne Naess advocates this total field image of the world. So living things are knots in what he calls the biospherical net. So we are all part of this same sort of system, and we're just bits of it in the same way that any other creature is. And this separation that we have sort of made between ourselves and nature is destructive, according to him. So it's kind of like utilitarianism, there's some of these environmental views, in that it considers the happiness of every living thing equally. And according to Naess and some others, the idea of doing this, of considering the happiness and welfare of other creatures as well as humans, can be beneficial to the other creatures, but also to ourselves. And to take it further, you might question what creatures should be considered as part of this happiness equation, and you might even extend it to non-living creatures as well. So in the 1980s, he modified this view and renamed it Ecosophy T, and this was just supposed to, I think, make it a little less strident, but to focus on principles that could be applied for positive environmental action. And this idea that humans are part of nature can be good and bad. So some critics have said, look, if we view nature as part of ourselves, we don't treat ourselves all that well. So it's not clear that this would make us treat nature all that well either. And some critics like Plumwood have said, look, it's better to see nature as its own entity with its own needs and values, and not to just put ourselves in it, and that might allow us to still focus on ourselves or anthropomorphize even, but rather to see nature and creatures in nature as being separate from us, but as also having value. So neo-Marxists have taken a little slightly different view on this, and they've said, look, the idea that we and nature are objects to be studied, analyzed, and exploited is part of the problem. And this is the Marxist problem of people being essentially labor and just to be used by capitalists. And we have this same view a lot of times, according to them, of nature as well, So Adorno advocates a sensuous immediacy attitude toward nature and argues that in before industrialization, we saw the world and nature in this more enchanted sort of way, and in this kind of mystical sort of way that we've lost, and that we should go back to something like that and have this have more of an aesthetic experience of nature and appreciate it for itself instead of just the way we can use it. So, extending on this idea, some philosophers have argued for something called new animism, which is the intrinsic value of all parts of nature and not just living things. And again, this is kind of the idea of returning to really a very idealized view of the indigenous view of the world as sacred, mysterious, and worthy of love, not just exploitation. This is kind of, again, idealizing what we were like before technology, which we probably never were. But it's a good way to maybe think about nature as not just something to be exploited, but rather something to be connected with. And we talked earlier about Philip Goff's panpsychism, and part of his motivation for that view is the idea that if we think of everything in the universe as possessing consciousness, maybe we can help improve our relationship to the natural world. He thinks that if we think of everything as conscious, we'll be less destructive toward the natural world. This doesn't necessarily follow, because humans have been pretty awful to one another and to animals, which most of us agree are conscious, but it's a nice idea, and maybe it would help. According to him, he thinks it would.